I'm going to talk about one way that organizations are learning to encourage problem solving at work, workplace venting. Now, venting is a release of feelings, emotions, and thoughts about what's upsetting. And it's important to note that venting is slightly different from complaining. So complaining is more intentional, where the goal is to directly address the source of the problem or to change another person's behavior. And venting is not that intentional. It's more aimed at getting relief from negative feelings. And it's typically aimed at a third party like a friend or a family member or a coworker who is not directly involved with the problem. Now, the practice of venting is typically discouraged, and for good reasons. For one, venting usually does the opposite of making people feel better. It often makes people feel worse. Because venting focuses us on negative feelings and leads to rumination, where we turn over the same feelings and reactions in our mind. It can also be distracting and stir the pot by raising awareness of the problem and by spreading negativity. But while venting is typically negative, it is also quite prevalent in organizations. On average, coworkers vent to one another 4 times a day. They typically vent about things that are annoying, right, but not under their direct control, such as meetings that run late, scheduling conflicts, unreliable coworkers, or even messy break rooms. So, how do you turn a quite prevalent but negative practice in the workplace into something that can work for you? The answer we have found depends on how the listener responds. So when a listener provides new insight into the problem and encourages the venter to either rethink or reappraise an initial reaction to the problem, venters tend to resolve the problem more quickly. That is, if a listener responds with statements like, "I agree," "Yes, that is horrible," or "Wow, that's really unfair," he or she is essentially stoking the fire rather than helping the venter to make sense of the upsetting event. So this kind of supportive response is a confirmation of the venter's intense emotional focus, typically brought on by venting. However, if you give the venter an alternative way of thinking about the problem or a reason to rethink their initial upset reaction, venters often become more able to make sense of the problem. So examples of responses that typically help venters to rethink their reactions might be, "Well, I might react differently," or "In my experience, when I did that, it resulted in the opposite outcome I was hoping for," or "There may be another point of view here," or "Here's the problem as I see it." So the challenge is that venters do not typically pick listeners who give these responses. The number one reason that venters tell us they choose listeners is that they will support my feelings. However, they also report that they want listeners who will give them good advice or help them to solve the problem. So while venters are focused on their emotion and tend to pick people who respond to their feelings, they are also seeking to make sense of the problem. So the challenge in organizations is for coworkers to learn how to respond to venting in a way that creates solutions rather than rumination. So we have found that once people understand that venting does not make people feel better, no matter how they respond, they become more willing to respond in a way that's helpful for making sense of the problem. So if you're not going to make them feel better, why not be helpful rather than stoke the fire? If people are venting on average 4 times a day, it seems impractical for organizations to try to extinguish the practice. And when listeners respond in a way that triggers rethinking the problem rather than focusing on what's upsetting, it can create a very useful informal channel for coworkers to help one another make sense of problems. So the key is remembering what responses to seek out and what type of response to offer when someone vents to you.